You are listening to Elderberry Croft, Seasons of the Heart, Part 7, July Madness, written and narrated by Becky Dowdy. July Madness, Chapter 1. "Who asked you to be her watchdog?" Donny drawled, leaning away from the table on the back two legs of his chair. He watched Eddie's eyes narrow. He was pushing his luck, but he couldn't help the knee-jerk reaction to get his older brother riled up. Donny knew he was Ma's favorite boy, but he also knew that Eddie was the better man. Most of the time, he didn't care, and when he did, it wasn't a feeling that a couple of beers couldn't wash away. But when Eddie started telling him how to behave around a woman, a guy who had no woman, who drove them off from boredom, who'd tried and failed to steal Donny's woman, he wouldn't let it rest. And for some reason, Eddie wasn't just blowing him off the way he usually did. "It's not about being a watchdog. It's about respect." Eddie turned to look out the front window of the trailer, his attention caught, and Donny followed his gaze. There she was, heading their way, all that hair piled on top of her head like Elvis's woman. "She's married anyway." Eddie's voice lowered, almost as if he thought she might hear them talking about her, and Donny laughed. "I know, I heard, but I haven't seen any husband around. For all I know, you cooked up this shadow man so you could play the hero." Donny held up his empty glass toward his mother, who stood behind him at her kitchen sink, washing the dishes from their late lunch. "Hey, Ma, remember how Eddie used to make up bad guys so he could run around with his underwear outside his pants?" He snorted. "Can you get me a refill since you're standing there?" Eddie kicked the front of Donny's chair, nearly sending him over backward. "Say please or get up and do it yourself. She's not your servant." Donny lurched up, slamming his empty glass on the table. He was 8 years old again. "You're such a jack— Language!" Edith's shrill voice cut in on his outburst. "Please, Donny, you know I don't like that kind of talk. And Eddie, why do you have to pick on him? Why can't you be nice to your little brother?" "Mom, he's 40 years old, no job, and homeless. What's there not to pick on?" Eddie, too, had risen, and the brothers squared off across the oval dining table. Edith eyed them both, then threw her hands in the air, a small glob of soap bubbles flying off her fingertips to land on Donny's forearm. He stared down at it for a moment, watching as the bubbles began to burst, then brushed them away. He knew he couldn't take Eddie. He'd tried many times before, and he knew it would just make Mom angry, possibly enough that she'd kick him out again. So he had to be careful, at least until he could convince Sheena to take him back. What was the girl's name? Liz? Lita? Lily? He couldn't even recall her face anymore, let alone her name. But Sheena didn't care that he couldn't remember anything about the other girls. It didn't matter to her that he didn't care one bit about them. She didn't care that he only loved her, that the others meant nothing to him, that they were just there when she wasn't. It was always Sheena in his heart, always her on his mind, always her he wanted. The day Sheena stopped going to the bars with him was the day trouble started up again. When she went with him, she watched out for him. She made sure he got home before he did anything stupid. She made sure the women who were on the prowl for drunken fools like him didn't get their claws into him. But without Sheena there to protect him, he was in and out of trouble all the time. Clean and sober, she demanded. She wanted him clean and sober before she'd take him back. By her standards or his? As far as he was concerned, beer didn't count, and clean meant he'd tested negative for all the important things at his last physical. Sheena seemed to have a different set of criteria, and Donny couldn't help wondering if she'd shared that list with Eddie. In the past, when Donny came to stay with Mom, Eddie just steered clear. He didn't get involved in Donny's relationships. He didn't try to give him any flack about being here, and he didn't watch him like a hawk, keeping him busy doing odd jobs around the property all day either. But that was before Sheena had played Eddie to get back at Donny. This time, Eddie was dropping in on a daily basis, usually first thing in the morning, like he was making sure Donny was getting out of bed. Donny had already changed out 2 screens on the back of the trailer, replaced the shower head with a water saver unit, trimmed the bushes all along Mom's side of the driveway behind the row of mailboxes, and changed the oil in her car. He actually enjoyed working with his hands just as much as Eddie did, but he didn't like the fact that it felt like Eddie was babysitting him. He turned to watch the girl from space number 12. She practically floated across the driveway to her mailbox, the last one in the row, and pulled out a small stack of letters and flyers. The half-smile she wore never wavered. Then she continued on past the front of them and over to Myra's, probably to check on the invalid. Donny glanced back at Eddie and couldn't resist when he saw the way his big brother watched her. "She's married, or so I hear." "Shut it," Eddie barked. "And tomorrow, if you're planning on showing up, you'd better not make a fool of yourself. You make her uncomfortable, I'll make you uncomfortable." Donny rolled his eyes and laughed. "I think you're confusing attraction with discomfort, right, Ma?" She didn't respond, but he didn't expect her to. He knew whose side she'd take if it came right down to it. Women don't want nice and sweet and sappy. They want danger and spice and a hunk of burning love. They like to feel a little rattled, right, Ma? Looks like that philosophy's working well for you. Eddie hitched up his pants and headed for the door. "Thanks for lunch, Mom." "You're welcome, Eddie. I'll see you tomorrow at Willow's." "I'll see you there too, big brother. And don't worry, I'll be all spit and polished up and on my very bestest behavior." Eddie's words had stung, but Donny had learned to deflect his blows with sarcasm. What did Eddie know about women anyway? When Donny first heard about the cookout, he'd had no intention of being there, hanging out with the park oldies. Besides, he'd been hoping for a chance to hook up with Sheena again. She loved fireworks, and he couldn't remember a 4th of July they hadn't spent together. She hadn't returned his phone calls, though, and he was beginning to think she was serious about him changing his habits. It riled him that everyone wanted him to be different than he was. Well, fine. If she didn't want him, he'd find someone who did. And why not start with a lovely Willow Goodhope? Living just a few 100 feet away from him sure made her convenient. Yes, she was a classy broad, but he could class it up for a while. Maybe Sheena would notice and think twice about cutting him loose. The 4th of July cookout she was throwing for the residents of the Coach House Trailer Park would be the perfect opportunity to work his magic. He'd show up ready to help, ready to serve, ready to be there in whatever capacity she needed him. And if she really did have a husband out there, all the better. No commitment required. He'd be free to go back to Sheena when she came to her senses. July Madness, Chapter 2. The day dawned hot and dry, and by 9 o'clock in the morning, Edith was ready for a nap. She'd been up early to do some baking before the heat set in, and to have a little time alone. She loved having Donny around, but every time he moved back in, it was always an adjustment. She knew it was temporary, it always was, but this time, she hadn't heard from Sheena. The girl, without fail, called her within the first few days to talk about the man they both loved. But this time, things were different. "Nope," Donny said the last time Edith asked if he'd heard from his girlfriend. "I screwed up in a big way, and she's really mad. But you know how it is, Ma. She just needs time to cool off a bit." Unfortunately, Edith did know how it was. Donny wasn't a little boy anymore, and if he didn't figure that out soon, he'd end up with nothing, nobody. But Edith didn't know how to tell him that without hurting his feelings, and she wasn't going to be the one to do that. He'd been hurt enough by the people in his life. When her husband left the first time, the boys were little, just 5 and 9, and all 3 of them wandered around the house a little lost and uncertain. In the months that followed, Eddie seemed to come to some kind of understanding about the situation, and he fell back into the rhythm of boyhood, just a little more watchful and reserved than he'd been before. But Donny, for whatever reason, seemed to regress. He often woke up crying in the middle of the night and started wetting his bed again after being completely potty-trained for almost 2 years. Then Winston came back, full of remorse and affection, and Donny blossomed. But it was the beginning of a roller coaster ride for the little boy. Winston coming and going, Donny regressing and progressing correspondingly, and Eddie just rolling with the punches, steady and stable. She never had to worry about Eddie. He just seemed to have a clearer view of the big picture, not taking responsibility for his father's presence or absence. But Donny, sweet Donny, he seemed to need more attention, more accolades, more validation, and he got it from whomever would give it to him, particularly his women friends. Poor Sheena. She really loved him, and Edith's heart hurt for what the girl must be going through. She wouldn't step in, and she certainly wouldn't take sides against Donny, but she sympathized wholly with Sheena. In that way, he was just like his father. If he didn't grow up and take life a little more seriously, he would end up alone, leaving behind him a trail of hurt. The sounds of Donny waking up made her reconsider taking a nap. He'd slept in this morning. Eddie hadn't been by to recruit him for some odd job, but now that he was awake, he'd be wanting breakfast. And she was missing money from her secret stash tucked inside the candy dish on the top shelf of her curio cabinet. That made it hard to sleep when Donny was awake. "Mornin', Ma," Donny mumbled, making his way into the kitchen and dropping into a chair at the table. "What's for breakfast?" "I can make you some scrambled eggs and toast," she replied, wondering, not for the first time, how he managed to feed himself when she wasn't around. She was pretty sure Sheena didn't wait on him hand and foot, but Donny didn't appear underfed. "Sounds great. Do I have time to jump in the shower first?" He ran his fingers through his thick brown hair, just beginning to turn steely at his temples, and stretched his arms up over his head. "I'm going to head on over to Willow's place a little early, see if she needs some help getting things ready." "That sounds nice," Edith replied, careful to keep her expression blank. It did sound nice, but she also knew Donny. He didn't offer to help anyone unless he thought he might be getting something out of it. Oh, he didn't mind working. He just didn't initiate it without a good reason. She knew this had a lot to do with the exchange between him and Eddie yesterday, but she wasn't sure if Donny was just trying to make Eddie mad, or if he was considering pursuing the Goodhope girl. Either way, there was going to be some kind of fallout. Eddie would be livid, and Sheena would be devastated. Donny, like Winston, almost always got the girl. "Go ahead and shower. I'll start the eggs when I hear the water go off." Maybe she should call Eddie and give him a heads up. Maybe she should call Willow and give her a heads up. She waited until Donny had closed himself into the bathroom, then picked up her phone and dropped into the chair he'd vacated. But what would she say? If she let on to Eddie that she was concerned, he might come down on her for taking Donny in at all. She knew how he felt about her letting Donny come back. That was why she never told him until Donny was safely ensconced in her spare room. And Willow? She hardly knew the girl. "Hello, my son is coming over to offer his services, but make sure you're fully aware of what services he's offering before you say yes." No, it wouldn't do. Her hands were tied. She'd have to let things play out. Besides, Willow was a big girl. She seemed to have her head on straight. Pouring a third cup of coffee, a luxury she rarely allowed herself, Edith sat and listened to the soothing sound of the shower and gazed out the window at the row of potted plants on her small deck. It really was nice to have someone else in the house again. July Madness, Chapter 3. "Looking good," Donny quipped, nodding at his reflection. Freshly shaved, nose and ear hair trimmed, he'd brush his teeth after breakfast. His California boy tan set off his sea-glass eyes, and he practiced the move that made women pause and look again. Cocked head, crooked grin, half-lidded gaze that drifted from eyes to mouth, then back up again. Never lower than the chin. Not that first look. Willow Goodhope would never know what hit her. Streamers and paper lanterns on strings of twinkle lights crisscrossed the patio at space number 12. Folding tables and chairs leaned against a tree, waiting to be set up, and 2 good-sized grills were placed at the far end of the lot where the smoke wouldn't get in people's eyes. Donny recognized the propane grill as Eddie's. The other had a bag of hickory-smoked charcoal briquettes leaning against it. His mouth was already watering. Willow's front door stood wide open, and he made his way up the steps, anticipating the chance to catch her alone. Poking his head inside, his eyes quickly adjusted to the dim interior, and he whistled his appreciation. The draped fabric and bold colors, funky lighting and mismatched furniture, it all made him think of some Middle Eastern harem. Even the air smelled heavy with the aroma of far-off places, spicy, tangy, intoxicating. He was really starting to like this girl. "Hello," he called out, just as she stepped out of the tiny bathroom at the back of the one-room cottage, a damp towel draped around her neck. Her cheeks were flushed from exertion, her hair pulled away from her face in a ponytail on top of her head, and she wore a pair of low-slung jeans, a black tank top, and flip-flops. When she saw him, she hesitated, like a deer caught in the headlights. "Hi, Donny." She was polite, but her tone was careful, and he felt the familiar challenge rising up in him. "Gonna play hard to get, are you?" "Hello, Willow Goodhope. Happy Independence Day." He spoke slowly, almost a drawl, and took one step inside the door. "Happy Independence Day to you, too. Will you be coming to the cookout this afternoon?" She pulled the towel from around her neck and patted her cheeks with it, but didn't come any closer. Was that a dismissal? "Actually, that's why I'm here, to offer my help. Whatever you need, you name it. I'm your man." He gave her his practiced look, satisfied when she pressed her lips together and blinked. She got the message. "Oh, well, Eddie is on his way back with a ladder. He's helping me hang the last of the lanterns out front. And Joe's prepping the ribs at his place. Doc and Al will be here in about an hour to help with setting up tables. So there's not much else that needs doing, at least not right now." She squared her shoulders and took a few steps toward him. "But thank you for offering." Not the response he was hoping for. "Eddie's helping, is he? Doesn't he have a toilet to fix or something?" Willow laughed, a sound too loud for the small room, and it grated a little on his nerves. "It's a holiday, Donny. Eddie should have the day off, too. He deserves it." She seemed to gain her footing, and she crossed the room to her little kitchenette, just a counter fit with a sink and a stove along one wall, an apartment-sized refrigerator, and a round bistro table for 2. The window above the sink, topped with a jumble of colorful scarves, looked out over the patio, and she busied herself there, washing up the dishes sitting on the counter. He didn't miss the fact that she was setting 2 coffee cups, 2 plates, and 2 bowls upside down in her drainer. So, Eddie was moving in on the married woman, just like he'd done with Sheena. Donny would have to turn up his game and play it cool. "Well then, Miss Willow Goodhope, sounds like you've got everything under control. But you let me know if you think of anything I can do, all right? I'm a sure hand at the grill, too. I'm happy to man one for you." "Thanks, Donny. I'll keep that in mind. I think we're covered between Joe working the rib grill and Eddie on the burgers. But if either of them needs a break, I'll have them let you know." She glanced over at him and smiled brightly, but she kept her hands busy. Yes, she was dismissing him. "Until 2, then." Donny turned and started to walk away, then paused right outside the window where he was eye to eye with her. "Just make sure you send Eddie home to shower. He's prone to forgetting that stuff, you hear?" Then he winked at her and walked away, not giving her a chance to respond. He'd bring flowers and a bottle of sweet sparkling wine. Maybe Ma could loan him her car. And maybe her candy dish could loan him a couple more bucks. July Madness, Chapter 4. The day just got hotter, and by noon Edith had a headache that wouldn't subside, even with a double dose of aspirin. If she didn't lie down and sleep, she wouldn't be fit for the party today, and she really did not want to miss it. She hadn't heard from Donny since he left 2 hours ago, and assuming Willow had put him to work, she made herself a turkey sandwich, then headed to her room. She drew the blinds on her windows, slipped off her shoes, and lay back on top of her bedspread. A half an hour would do her wonders, she was certain. She was just drifting off to sleep when she heard the front door open. Donny's footsteps were recognizable. He had a shuffling gait that had defied her repeated entreaties to him to pick up his feet. She could hear him in the small kitchen, the fridge door opening and closing, water in the sink, a cupboard door shutting with a little too much force. Was he angry? She sighed. She would not go out there. The rummaging soon stopped, and Edith relaxed her shoulders. He was probably eating something. Her fatigue was beginning to pull her under, but then a sound just outside her door caught her attention. A footstep, light, careful. Why was Donny being sneaky? "Ma?" It was barely above a whisper, and something told her to stay quiet. "Are you asleep?" She clamped her lips shut and waited. A few moments later, she heard the telltale jingle of her keys and wondered, regrettably, why she hadn't thought to bring her purse and keys into her bedroom with her. The car started up outside, and the sound of the tires backing out over the gravel driveway reminded her of the old days, and Winston sneaking off to do his dirty work. Her tears came, but she stayed where she was, stretched out like a sacrifice on the altar of motherhood. Maybe knowing nothing had changed would free her up to sleep. When Edith awoke nearly an hour later, her nose was a little stuffy, but her headache had faded. She sat up slowly, made her way to the window, and peered out between the slats of the blinds. Her car was parked exactly the way she'd left it, and she was certain she'd find her keys in her purse, hanging on the coat rack just inside the door, just the way she'd left that, too. She would simply pretend nothing happened. She couldn't handle anything else right now. Donny was a big boy. If he was doing something that would get him in trouble, it was probably better she didn't know about it. Besides, it was almost 1:30, and she needed to get her casserole warmed up for the party. By the time Edith made her way over to Willow's, a crowd was already milling around the patio. She put on a brave face, smiled brightly at Myra, who sat like a queen in a chair by the stream, her foot propped up on a stool, hovered over by her brother-in-law, Jack. Doc and Al were parked in a couple of chairs nearby, sharing fishing stories. Edith located the hostess, who was arranging various potluck dishes on a long tile-top table under the eaves of the patio out of the sun. "Welcome, Edith. I'm so glad you're here," Willow called out, waving a pale hand at her. The girl looked as fresh as a summer marigold, her red hair in a poof on top of her head, a few tendrils curling around her face and neck. "What delicious dish did you bring today?" Her effervescence was contagious, and soon Edith found her rhythm and settled into the camaraderie of the little neighborhood she loved. Joe and his gorgeous wife Vivian wore matching aprons and worked in perfect unison, prepping and slathering and flipping large racks of ribs, chatting with the other residents, and flirting affectionately with each other. Eddie stood at the other grill, a long-handled metal spatula in one hand, his head dipped in concentration, not on the burgers, but on the woman who stood beside him, holding a platter of empty hamburger buns. She smiled shyly up at him, and Edith studied her for a moment. She looked familiar, but Edith was unable to place her. Willow appeared at Edith's side, holding out a tray of cheese and crackers and sliced fruit. "Do you know Shelley Little?" she asked, nodding toward the girl with Eddie. "She lives in space number 8, right behind your son. When she asked how she could help today, I told her to make it her job to see that Eddie had everything he needed to make perfect burgers." Edith looked up at Willow's shining eyes and laughed. She was playing matchmaker. "She seems to be doing a fine job, doesn't she?" Edith quipped, responding to her hostess's mood. "It's lovely out here, by the way. What a wonderful thing you're doing, bringing us all together like this." "Thank you. I'm glad so many are coming." Willow smiled appreciatively and swept off to serve another guest. Shelley Little. Wow, who would have thought? Edith hardly recognized the girl. The last time she'd seen her was months ago, and she was pulling out of the driveway in the early morning, her head ducked almost furtively. She'd looked like a hunched-over little old lady behind the wheel of her big car, nothing like the demure, long-legged creature in her red and white polka-dot dress. The way Eddie was looking at her made Edith think that perhaps he, too, was noticing Shelley for the first time. But where was Donny? And then she saw him crossing the little bridge connecting the front half of the park to the trailers on this side of the stream, and his arms were loaded with a huge bouquet of red, white, and blue flowers, a 24-pack of his favorite beer, and a bottle of what appeared to be champagne. He wore a cocky smile and walked in that floppy way of his, making a grand entrance out of his appearance. "Hey, neighbors!" His voice was loud, too loud, and Edith cringed. "Oh, Lord, please don't let him be drunk." "Ma, you made it! I thought maybe you were going to sleep through the whole party and miss out on all the fireworks." Then he laughed too loudly, too. The mood among the guests shifted subtly, and although everyone went back to their conversations, it all sounded a little too bright to Edith's ears, as if everyone was trying too hard to act normally in the wake of Donny's intrusion. Edith glanced over at Eddie, and her breath caught at the sparks shooting from her older son's eyes. "Oh, Lord, please don't let him flip out," she silently begged. Was she going to spend the whole party praying? And who paid for all that stuff Donny carried? She wondered if there was anything left in her candy dish. Taking a deep breath, she waved, beckoning him to come sit with her. No one else seemed inclined to have him join them. He made his way over to her, stopping to banter with a few folks on the way, and bent over to kiss the top of her head, but didn't sit. He crossed to the table of food and set the patriotic bouquet of dyed carnations and white daisies in a blue vase among the casserole dishes. It did look awfully festive, Edith noted, and it was a nice gesture, bringing flowers to the hostess. She glanced around. No one else had thought to bring any. Then Willow stepped out of her little place, having refilled her tray of hors d'oeuvres. July Madness, Chapter 5. Willow's eyes lit up at the sight of the flowers on her table. He knew how to get to a woman. He stood back and watched smugly as she buried her nose in the bouquet, then lifted her eyes to scan the crowd, obviously looking for the person who'd brought them. When she saw him, her smile faltered. What kind of game was she playing? "Did you bring the flowers, Donny?" Her eyes were wary as they darted back and forth between him, the flowers, and the alcohol he held in each hand. "I did. For you, the hostess with the mostest." He winked at her, gave her the look again, and raised the bottle of sparkling wine. "And this is for you, too. A housewarming gift from me." "Thank you, Donny. The flowers are lovely." Then she turned and called out to be heard above the rise and fall of various conversations. "Folks, look what Donny brought for all of us to enjoy. Aren't they perfect for our party?" She glanced back at him and waved at the drinks he still held. "The coolers are over by the water. You can put the champagne in there, too. I don't drink, but it would be a shame to waste that. I'm sure there are many here who would love to share a toast with you this evening." No. He'd just spent his mother's hard-earned cash on a $20 bottle of fancy fake champagne in order to get in good with Willow. He wasn't about to waste it on all the losers sitting around the patio. The beer, sure. He knew others were contributing too, so he could afford to share. Smiling nonchalantly, not letting on that he was even aware of the cold shoulder she sent him, he made his way over to the row of coolers and popped the lid open on first one, then another, then another. Not a single can of Bud, not a bottle of Corona, not even a foo-foo wine cooler in sight. What kind of party was this? Donny glanced around. Surely Doc wouldn't be hanging out here without his whiskey. And Al? That man didn't leave his house without a six-pack dangling from his fingertips. But there they sat, over by Joe, trying to make his fancy woman blush, both touting sodas. Sodas! Myra had to be sipping on her sangria. But no, she had a tall glass of raspberry lemonade from one of the party drink dispensers on the food table. Fine, he'd keep his beers to himself too. Just because no one else felt like drinking didn't mean he was going to waste a holiday. Popping open the first can out of the box, he took a deep swig of the cold brew. Then he turned back to Willow. "Hey, Ms. Willow Goodhope. Seems I didn't get the memo, and I'm the only one who brought the suds. Can I put these in your refrigerator so they're not a problem?" Her door stood open, and a large hand-painted sign hanging from a hook at eye level read, "Restroom this way." He'd have to make regular visits to the little boy's room, but if no one else was sharing, he shouldn't be obligated either. "Sure," she smiled brightly, falling for his ruse. She would never know that the box he carried wasn't going to be full when he left at the end of the party. "Thanks. We have a few folks here who are trying to cut back, so we opted for a land of the alcohol-free party today." She guffawed loudly, obnoxiously, and Donny almost grimaced. He'd have to make sure he didn't get her laughing in the middle of any romantic moments. What a mood killer that honking was. A few hours later, fed and watered and marinating in more than half a dozen beers on top of what he'd had before the event, Donny was feeling very relaxed. This party wasn't so bad after all. Vivian was a hoot, a classy broad in her red leggings and navy blue and white striped shirt. How women managed in those shoes they wore was beyond him, but he liked watching her walk in her red heels. Al had slipped away several times, once or twice with Doc in tow, and Donny was pretty sure they weren't off looking for croquet balls for the ladies. Kathy from across the drive and Shelley with the goo-goo eyes for Eddie, Patty Davis and Ma had a rousing lawn game going, and they'd lost one of the wooden balls in the brush by the stream. Donny, along with Myra and Jack, her dead husband's brother who had the hots for her, cheered the two teams on. The younger couple from the upstairs apartment of the main building, he forgot their names, sat with Richard Davis and his son Ivan deep in conversation. Ivan intimidated Donny a little, although he'd never admit it. He was gay, for one thing, and Donny didn't want Ivan getting any ideas, but he also seemed really close to his dad, and for some reason, it rankled Donny to see their two heads turned comfortably toward each other. Willow continued to flit around the party, making certain everyone had everything they needed, and Eddie was busy scrubbing the grill he'd used. Donny knew he was being watched, but he didn't think his big brother had caught on to his secret nipping either. Besides, what was he going to do about it? Kick him out of the party? Donny watched Shelley for a few minutes, curious about her story. According to Myra, she was the token cat lady in the park, but she didn't seem whacked out. She held herself upright. She looked clean. She didn't dress weird, and she spoke softly, sometimes using words he didn't understand. And that dress she was wearing, even though it was red, reminded him of Julia Roberts' polka dot dress in that chick flick Sheena loved so much, the one about the prostitute who got her sugar daddy, Richard Gere, to fall in love with her. He glanced over his shoulder at Eddie, wondering if he was interested, wondering why he'd heard nothing about this girl up until today. She wasn't ugly. She wasn't a bombshell either, but Eddie could do a lot worse. Eddie had done a lot worse. But Eddie was watching Willow, and Donny's eyes turned to follow his brother's gaze. Willow held a large trash bag in her hand, and she was making another circuit of the patio, collecting trash. She bent over to pick up an abandoned plate and napkin, and when she straightened, she glanced over at Eddie and caught him studying her. She smiled warmly and crossed the cobbled stones to where he was working. She asked him a question, to which he grinned, nodded, and said something apparently hilarious, because Willow threw her head back and laughed like a hyena. This time, Donny did cringe, partly because of her raucous laugh. He hated it, and partly because of the way she was responding to Eddie. Eddie! The big tub of lard with the greasy hair and greasier pants. Eddie, who sometimes smelled like he hadn't made it to the toilet in time. Eddie, who hadn't had a woman notice him, besides Sheena, in years. And now there were two of them hanging on his every word. What did they see in him? And why weren't they all over Donny? He suddenly missed Sheena something fierce. Where was she today? Who was she with? Had she found another shoulder to cry on, just like she'd done with Eddie? It wasn't long before missing her turned to something a little uglier, darker. He knew she liked the fireworks, and he knew she preferred to watch them from under a blanket in the back of her truck. And he knew that for the first time in years, he wasn't under that blanket on the 4th of July, watching the fireworks with her. Pushing himself up too quickly, he stumbled a little, and Myra glanced up at him with those wide eyes of hers. "Aye, Donny, you scared me. My heart, remember? I'm not ready to die yet." Then she turned adoring eyes on her brother-in-law on the other side of her and said, "I have a very good reason to stick around a little longer, right, Jack?" "Sorry," Donny mumbled, not really caring a lick about Myra's perfectly healthy heart. "I just need to use the little boy's room." He headed inside, glancing over his shoulder to see who was paying attention. He stopped at the little fridge first and pulled out 2 more cans. The box seemed emptier than it should, but he didn't have time to count how many he'd already downed. The last thing he needed was Willow, or worse, Eddie, catching him in here, a beer in both hands. He hurried to the bathroom, put the lid of the toilet down, and sat. The first beer he chugged. The second he drank a little slower, swishing the cold liquid around in his mouth. If he sat in here long enough, he really would need to empty his bladder. "Convenient, at least," he said aloud. There was a full-length mirror on the back of the bathroom door, and because the bathroom was so small, he could see himself in all his ridiculous glory, hiding in the bathroom like a teenager, downing beers like there was no tomorrow, wanting Sheena, wanting Willow. Heck, he might even settle for Shelley if Eddie didn't want her. Tired of looking at himself, he let his eyes wander around the tiny room. There was a shelving unit built up over the back of the toilet where Willow kept folded towels and washcloths, a basket of girly stuff like bottles of shampoo and conditioner, lotions, and other assorted things. He breathed in deeply, entranced by the way her place smelled. It permeated everything, but when he stood and popped the caps off the products on the shelves, none of them had that same aroma. He gingerly opened her medicine cabinet, the magnet on the mirrored door making a loud click as it released its hold and swung wide. Cringing, he paused, ears pricked, but his eyes wandered over the items in there, too. Ibuprofen, Q-tips, cotton balls, nail polish, the usual stuff. He reached up and took a little packet off the top shelf. Birth control pills? With no man around? Something wasn't adding up. Feeling a little bolder, he pulled open the small cupboard below the sink. He found paper towels, bathroom cleaning supplies, and a stack of rags folded neatly. Face down on top of the pile was a small framed photograph. He flipped it and peered down into the eyes of a child that looked exactly like Willow. Exactly. Unruly, wild curly hair, wide, sparkling eyes, a smile that hid mischief of one kind or another. It had to be her. She sat on the lap of a dark-haired man whose head was bent forward whispering something into her ear, but his eyes were lifted toward the camera, smiling just as openly as the child. It didn't seem to be an old photograph, though, and although Donny figured Willow probably wasn't any older than 30, the picture didn't look like it was taken 25 years ago. Maybe it was a copy. Prying the back off the frame, he carefully removed the padding that kept everything in place. Sure enough, on the back of the picture, the words, "Daddy and me," were scrawled in a careful hand. But why was the thing face down in her bathroom cupboard? He put the pieces back together and returned it just the way he'd found it. What did he care? Maybe she was mad at her dad and didn't feel like looking at his pretty face. Donny certainly understood that feeling. Besides, it wasn't like he could go out and ask her, "Hey, Willow, I was snooping around in your bathroom while I was downing my contraband beers, and I found that picture you hid of you and your dad. So what's up?" Right. Tap, tap, tap. The sharp whack of knuckles on the bathroom door startled Donny so badly he dropped the can he still held, the remaining contents spilling on the floor. "Donny, what are you doing in there?" Eddie. Turning the water on high and flushing the toilet at the same time so as to block out any sound he made, Donny pulled the roll of paper towels from under the sink and began sopping up the spilled beer. It wasn't much, but if Eddie was going to stand out there waiting for him, he'd smell the beer easy. "Can't a man take a leak in private? You my babysitter or something?" "Or something. Open up." "Seriously? Give me a minute, will you? I think I ate too much this afternoon." And what was he going to do with all the paper towels he'd used? "You have 5 minutes. If you're not out in 5 minutes, I'm coming in to get you out." Eddie's voice was low and rough, a tone Donny recognized as trouble. All right, I'll be out in a few minutes." Getting caught was bad enough. Getting caught by Eddie was even worse. Getting caught doing something he had every right doing, drinking, was absolutely ridiculous. He should just walk out with a beer in his hand. What were they going to do? Make him go home? Well, maybe it was about time he bail anyway. Yanking open the door, one hand clutching the wad of paper towels, both empty cans crumpled in the other, he stormed out into Willow's little place. But no one waited for him. No one was watching for him. Through the large window that looked out over the patio, he could see the rest of the neighborhood residents enjoying the late afternoon, relaxing in the shade, some with their feet in the little stream that ran along Willow's patio. Willow was handing out plates of some kind of dessert, one of those fancy layered cakes with white frosting and fruit between the layers. Even from here, it looked tasty. In fact, from here, Ms. Willow Goodhope looked pretty tasty herself. July Madness, Chapter 6. Edith accepted 2 plates from Willow and tried to smile brightly up at her hostess. Where on earth was Donny? The last time she'd seen him, he was heading inside to use the bathroom. Was he still in there? At that moment, he came out Willow's front door, and Edith frowned when she saw the cans in his hand. Why? Why did he have to drink when no one else was, when everyone else was committed to making this an alcohol-free party? She held one of the plates aloft. "Donny," she called, catching his attention. "I grabbed one for you, too. Come and get it." He came toward her, and she breathed in deeply through her nose, trying to gauge by smell how far gone he was. Only 2 cans wouldn't mess him up, but something told her that there were probably more than 2 cans missing from the 24-pack he'd brought. Whew! The air around him was ripe, sour. Is everything all right, Donny? Maybe he should go home and try to sleep it off. He could always come back in an hour or so, in time for the fireworks. Doc and Eddie had scrounged up a box of them from somewhere, and no one asked about those that might not meet California regulations for do-it-yourself fireworks shows. "I'm fine, Ma. Quit babying me." He didn't sound fine. He sounded angry, petulant, like a little boy who wasn't getting his own way. "Okay," she said, trying to keep a light conversational tone in her voice. "Just checking. This cake is delicious." "Oh, yeah, delicious." The way he said it, slowed down and a little slurred, made her so anxious she nearly dropped the plate she held out to him. He was openly staring at Willow, his eyes drifting freely over her slim body, lingering in places that weren't proper. "Donny!" She kept the smile on her face, but her whisper was harsh. "Stop it now!" "Back off, Ma. Nothing wrong with looking." His words were definitely slurred, and he didn't sound much like the mischievous boy he usually was. "Yes, there is. It's rude. Stop it. Please behave." She took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders, then held the cake in front of him. "Have some cake, honey." "Please behave." Donny mimicked her, his lips drawn up in a snarl. "Be a good boy, please. Don't be naughty, please." He spit on the ground near their feet. "Stop treating me like a little kid, Ma." Edith was shocked. Why was he talking to her like this, and here of all places? She quickly scanned the group. Where was Eddie? Doc planted himself directly in front of them, his solid mass clearly intended to block their view. He spoke quietly and wore a grin, his water-blue eyes bright and clear as he looked from one to the other, then landed and stayed on her son. Doc took another bite of the cake he held and chewed slowly. Edith could almost feel Donny's discomfort. "Hey there, Donny boy. Whatever happened to that box of brewskis you brought over with you?" It was asked in such a way that to any bystander there would have been no reason to sound the alarm. But Edith knew the question was weighted heavily, and she was pretty sure Doc was asking something else entirely. Doc waited patiently for a response, taking another bite of his cake, then another, before Donny finally cussed and started to get up. The steel toe of Doc's left boot landed strategically over the top half of Donny's Converse-encased foot, and Donny dropped back into his chair. They faced off in silence a few extremely long moments before Doc removed his foot and nodded reassuringly at Edith. There won't be any scenes here today, Donny boy. I think it's time for you to go home. And I think whatever's left of that case, you'll do just fine leaving it behind." "That won't be happening, Doc," Donny sneered. "I might agree to go home, but I paid for that beer. It's mine." Edith turned sharply, suddenly fed up with her son's boorish behavior. "Excuse me, Donny, who paid for that beer?" She kept her voice low, but she could feel a flush begin to creep up her chest. She was embarrassed by him today in a way she hadn't been in a long time. "I did, Ma." His voice caught a little, but he turned his scathing stare on her, challenging her to contradict him publicly. Usually, she just backed off, but this time, today, when almost everyone in the park had come together like a big family reunion, she was angry that her son would be that family member that everyone snickered about, the person everyone rolled their eyes over, the one people expected to screw up. Donny was a big boy. Why was he still expecting her to fix his mistakes? "You did? With what money? The stuff you stole from my candy dish?" She waved a hand at the flowers on the table, perky and pretty and festive. "And the flowers? The champagne? Did I pay for that, too?" She tried to keep her voice down, but her eyes began to smart, and she turned away. She would not cry. "It's time, buddy. Up you go." Doc leaned forward to put a hand on Donny's shoulder, but the younger man shrugged away from him, shoved his chair back, and sauntered away, his head high. Without missing a beat, Doc dropped into the chair Donny vacated and winked at Edith, then pointed at the desserts she still held. "You going to eat that?" She smiled tremulously, handed one to him, and whispered, "Thank you." "Everything all right at home?" She loved the way Doc dealt head-on with things without making a big to-do about it. The crowd had quieted around the exchange between him and her son, but the conversations were picking up quickly, and from appearances, no one would guess that he was asking her a very serious question. "I think so. I don't expect him to ransack the house or anything, and I have my car keys in my purse right here." With her heel, she tapped her bag beneath her seat. "He just needs to sleep it off. I suppose he had too much to drink." Doc snorted. "Yep, I suppose you're right." Edith glanced up to see Eddie and Shelley coming over the little bridge from the front of the property. They must have crossed paths with Donny, but Eddie didn't look upset. They made a lazy beeline to her side, though, and Eddie brought a chair around for Shelley and one for himself, too. "I just ran into Donny," Eddie stated matter-of-factly. "He's going to get some rest. I'll walk you home tonight, Mom. Make sure he's feeling better." "I'll walk Edith home," Doc stated, winking at Shelley. "You make sure Miss Little gets home in one piece, Eddie." Edith smiled when she thought she saw Eddie's face flush a little. She liked the girl from Space Number 8. She remembered Shelley's father, but not her mother. He was a hard man, always scowling. Edith often greeted folks as they came to the row of mailboxes that lined the edge of her lot, but Mr. Little only responded with a grunt, if at all. It made her feel like he thought she was spying on him rather than simply being neighborly. It got to the point where she would go inside if she saw him coming. She seldom saw Shelley at all during the years her father was alive, and when she did, she looked like his limp shadow, head down, hair falling forward around her features, never quite beside him, never quite falling behind. Since the man passed away, Shelley had become even more invisible. Edith remembered Eddie explaining that the girl worked nights and slept during the day. Kathy called her the cat lady, but then everyone else called Kathy the dog lady. So, for Shelley to be so soft-spoken and pleasant was a complete surprise to Edith. Granted, she could tell the girl worked hard to behave that way, but it was clear she wanted to fit in, to get to know the others in her neighborhood, and she was doing a good job of it. As though in response to the thoughts in Edith's head, Shelley swallowed the last bite of her cake and sighed deeply. "I don't think I've been to a cookout since I was a little girl," she said. "But since changing my work schedule to days, everything is different." She blushed a little when she glanced in Eddie's direction, and Edith sent up a little prayer that her big boy might open his eyes and see the potential in this girl. He needed someone in his life, and Shelley seemed like a perfect fit. Doc grinned at the girl. "I'll say, you look like $1,000,000, little lady. If I'd run into you on the streets, I wouldn't have recognized you from the little mouse I knew at the beginning of the year." Shelley giggled. "If you'd run into me on the streets, there might not be much of me left to recognize." Then she grimaced, bringing a hand up to cover her mouth. Oh dear, that was a morbid thought, wasn't it? But the men laughed, and Edith could tell they were enjoying watching Shelley blossom in their company. July Madness, Chapter 7. Donny had fallen asleep, crashed on the couch, the television blaring ESPN highlights. When he awoke, the sun was just starting to fade away, and he was hot, sweaty, and absolutely parched. At the back of the vegetable drawer in the fridge, he found just what he needed, Sheena's peppermint schnapps. She loved this stuff, and he always kept a bottle chilled on the off chance she might show up and want to talk. Any conversation that started with Sheena and schnapps always ended well for him. Today, however, with his beer still over at Willow's, and Sheena still not answering her phone, and nothing to drink in the fridge but milk and prune juice, he'd just have to make do with what he had. Making his way out to the front porch, bottle in one hand, a bag of potato chips in the other, he dropped into a flimsy beach lounger, turning it so he was facing the back of the coach house property where they'd be setting off the fireworks. The row of trees that grew along the stream blocked his view to the party still going on just the other side, but through the break in the brush where the bridge crossed over the water, he had a good shot out toward the field. He'd be able to see the majority of the light show without having to play nice with the others. Besides, he could hear the rise and fall of conversation interspersed with laughter and a few hoots and hollers over something said or done. The distinctive sound of Willow's laugh especially made him momentarily glad he was way over here. If he was going to take her on, he'd have to figure out a way to knock that thing down a notch or two. As the first of the bottle rockets shot into the air, Donny felt a keen desire to join the boys in their play, but he knew he wasn't welcome, and it made him angry. Who could fault him for staring at the red-headed hottie? Everything about her drew a man's eyes. Had he really been so out of line? He'd seen the way Eddie stared at her. Hey, he'd seen Doc ogling her, too. Even Ivan, with his leanings, seemed drawn to her side repeatedly throughout the afternoon. So what was wrong with him showing his appreciation for her, too? Willow didn't seem to mind. In fact, she'd been pretty adamant about him being there for her party, come to think of it. Sure, she'd pulled the coy act, but he'd caught on to her when he saw how she kept peeking at him from the corner of her eye, sending him those come-hither smiles. And when he showed up with the flowers? Oh yeah, that was definitely more than gratitude in her eyes, and she made sure everyone knew it by announcing his gift to the whole crowd. When he was sensitive enough to put the beer in her fridge instead of the cooler, she'd been very, very grateful, and her throaty "thank you" sent a chill of anticipation rippling over his skin even now. He took a long swig off the cold bottle in his hand, then pressed the curve of it to his neck, his cheek. Just thinking about her had him working up a sweat. Not long after the fireworks, amateur but admittedly fun to watch, Doc, Al, and Ma made their way across the bridge, still jabbering away. They didn't notice him sitting there in the dark until they were at the steps. "Donny boy." What a jerk. Doc knew he hated to be called that. One of these days, when Doc wasn't looking, Donny might just alter his whiskey. Nothing serious, but he would get a kick out of knowing why the old soldier boy kept making a beeline to the bathroom. Ma. He wouldn't acknowledge the two men flanking her. "Hi, honey. Sorry you missed the fireworks." She didn't sound like she was too sorry about it. "Didn't miss them. I sat right here and watched them." "Good. I'm glad." Why was she just standing there at the bottom of the steps? "I see you didn't miss your beer either," Doc drawled, pointing at the bottle in Donny's hand. Donny held it up, brandishing it like a trophy. "You mean because I have this?" In the light of the lamppost on the driveway, Donny was a little surprised to see the once full bottle was nearly half gone. "Yep. Think it's time to put a lid on that one, too." "Back off, Doc. This is my house, and you're standing on my property. Maybe you should go on home now." He spoke slowly, but even he heard the slur in his words. Suddenly, Ma was marching up the steps to her front porch, her finger out, pointing at him. "This is not your house, Donny Banks, and this is not your property. This is my house and my property, and these are my friends, and I don't want you talking that way to them." Her head, backlit from the streetlight, glowed like she wore a halo of light, but her plump stature denied her efforts to be some kind of an angel of wrath. A gurgling laugh slipped out of him, and the minute it did, he knew he shouldn't have let it. "Give me your keys, Donny." Ma held out her hand. "I don't have them. They're in the house on the coffee table." What was she going to do? Lock him inside for the night? Perfect. Edith turned to face the two men still waiting at the steps. "Gentlemen, thank you for bringing me home. I'm going inside now. Donny, on the other hand, is going to have to sleep this off out here. I'm letting you know just in case I need to call one of you or Eddie to report a break-in." And with that, Ma spun on her heels, walked inside, and locked the door behind her. Stunned, Donny stared at the door, waiting for it to open again, for her to tell him she was just trying to teach him a lesson. But it stayed closed. The porch light suddenly flickered on, blinding him so he had to squeeze his eyes shut for a moment. Doc waited until Donny was looking at him. "I didn't have any trouble understanding what your mom said. Did you?" Without waiting for a response, he turned to Al. "Did you understand Edith, Al?" "Sure did. Looks like Donny's sleeping out here on the front porch tonight." Al, not one for confrontation, but one who tried to stand behind the right side, nodded at the end of his statement, adding a visual punctuation mark to his words. "Yep, that's what I heard. How about you, Donny boy?" "I heard her." Besides, he really wasn't sleepy. His 3-hour nap had given him a second wind, and he was just starting to cool off in the night air. It wouldn't get below 68 degrees tonight, so he wasn't worried about being too cold. "Good. Just making sure we're all clear on this." Then Doc and Al, as one unit, turned and walked away. Donny glared after them, wishing for a pellet gun so he could pop them both in the backs of their heads. That would teach them to mind their own business. An hour later, the park was quiet. The last of the partygoers had gone home, and he saw Willow's patio lights wink off between the trees. Eddie had strolled by and waved, apparently not surprised to see Donny sprawled in the lounger. Ma must have called him to let him know what was going on. Feeling restless now, the bottle of schnapps nearly empty, he decided to take a walk. He stumbled down the steps and turned to walk along the front of the main building. It was a huge old monstrosity, most of it just storage or empty space. But the 2 apartments housed the couple who both worked at the post office, he still couldn't remember their names, upstairs, and the beautician who lived on the ground floor apartment. She had an enclosed patio right on the stream, and he knew, because he'd made it his business to know, that she had quite a green thumb, too. He hadn't seen her at the party today, but she had a boyfriend, and he'd heard her folks lived close by. She was several years older than he, probably mid-50s, and he didn't go for old ladies. But in her younger years, she must have been something else. She still wore big hair, shiny lip gloss, and he was pretty sure her eyelashes, and perhaps a few other body parts, were fake. Nothing wrong with that. The big house was quiet, dark, and the shadows that loitered under the expansive overhang where stagecoaches and horse-drawn buggies, and later cars, pulled under to unload for the evening, seemed to shift and whisper menacingly. Donny picked up his pace, his feet making too much noise on the gravel. He moved to the opposite side of the driveway where weeds turned to grass and ambled along. Myra's place was dimly lit by a lamp in her front window. There were no lights at Eddie's trailer, and Donny was glad for the lampposts along the drive that gave him some illumination. He'd stumbled along this way many times before, but tonight the silent shadows bugged him. Following the curve of the driveway past Eddie's, Donny crossed the bridge at the end of the park, pausing to listen to the water, seasonably low, as it gurgled along below him. He was surprised to see Shelley's house all lit up, and from his vantage point on the bridge, Donny could see through her half-open blinds. Eddie sat across from Shelley at the round table in her kitchen, a glass of milk in front of each of them, and a plate of cookies between them. They were talking animatedly, and the stupid grin on Eddie's face told Donny that his big brother was enjoying himself immensely. He couldn't stand to look a minute longer. Keeping his footsteps as light as possible, he made his way past space number 8, turning the bend toward Joe's. Joe's car was gone, so he must have gone home with his wife. That was a strange setup, her living in Los Angeles with her kids, him all the way out here. "Whatever floats your boat," Donny muttered. The Davises always left their porch light on, but the house was quiet, and Ivan's truck was parked in the driveway behind his folks' car. Maybe he was moving back home. Even Kathy's place was quiet tonight. The afternoon's activities must have worn her out. He'd been hoping she was still awake. She might not be very smart, but she was always good for a smoke and some meaningless conversation. Then he was at Willow's Elderberry Croft. Stupid name, but he had to admit it suited her. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine her standing in front of him, but he started to lose his balance and stumbled a little. "Note to self, don't close your eyes," he said, then chuckled at his own humor. Making his way to the laundry shed, he dropped down on the step and took another drag off the bottle. He had to squint now to make the front steps leading up to Willow's patio come into focus, and he was staring intently at them when her kitchen light flipped on. The curtains were drawn, but he could see her silhouette moving around the place. Ms. Willow Goodhope and he appeared to be the only ones awake on this end of the park. He couldn't sleep. She apparently couldn't sleep either. Maybe they could not sleep together. He pushed himself up, waited for the ground to steady beneath his feet, and made his way slowly toward her patio. The light flipped off, and another, softer one came on from somewhere else in the place. He liked soft lighting just as much as the next guy. At the front door, he pondered momentarily whether he should knock, call her name, or just go on in. The door was locked, he discovered, so he raised his fist and banged on her door so hard it even startled him. Nothing but silence answered him. He knocked again, a little firmer this time. Maybe she was in the bathroom and didn't hear him. "Willow," he called out. He backed up until he stood in front of the kitchen window and called through the screen. "I know you're in there. It's me, Donny." Maybe she knew some other Donny. "Your neighbor." Silence. Now he was getting mad. He hadn't come all this way in the middle of the night to have her ignore him. He knocked again, then leaned his forehead against the door to make it stop moving. "Willow, Willow, Willow, Willow," he murmured, her name rippling off his tongue in one long word. It sounded to his ears like the water flowing under the bridge, soothing, mysterious. "It's me, Willow. Let me in." "Go away, Donny." Her voice, directly on the other side of the door, startled him, not just because she was so close, but because she spoke firmly, loudly, pulling him up short in the middle of his seduction. Then the porch light switched on, just like it had at Ma's, blinding him. He covered his eyes and tried again. "Come on, Ma's making me sleep on the porch tonight, and I don't want to be alone. You're awake. I'm awake. We can—" His words were cut off by the weight of a thick hand on his shoulder, and then he was spinning, falling, his jaw on fire. Somewhere he heard the sound of breaking glass, and he wondered how much of the schnapps had just been wasted on the stone patio. July Madness, Chapter 8. "Are you all right, Willow? It's me, Eddie." Eddie hit him. Donny lay on the ground, his head throbbing. He cracked it pretty hard when he landed, but not enough to knock him out, thanks to the alcohol in his system keeping him loose-limbed. But when he tried to sit up, he thought he might be sick, so he lay back again, keeping his eyes open and focused on the bulk of his big brother standing in the doorway of Willow's place, talking quietly with her. She'd opened the door to him, the little player. "Hey!" Another male voice, and footsteps. Donny turned his head slowly to see Doc clomping across the bridge toward him. He snickered at the picture Doc made, walking on his side like that. A few moments later, Doc and Eddie were hauling him up by his armpits and half leading, half dragging him off the patio. He threw up in the bushes just on the other side of the stream, in the middle of the driveway right in front of the main house, then again in the dumpster near Eddie's place. His head was spinning so badly, he couldn't even tell if he was holding it upright or not. Dropping him unceremoniously on the bottom step of Eddie's stoop, Eddie and Doc muttered between themselves, and Donny let his head loll against the metal rail. A few moments later, a police cruiser pulled up into the driveway, and Eddie spoke briefly to the officer. Then he and Doc helped maneuver Donny into the back of the car. Eddie disappeared, then returned with a trash can and handed it to him. He also gave him a wet wad of paper towels. "Here, wash your face. I don't want to give you any water till you get to the station, just in case it makes you hurl again." Donny lifted his half-shut eyes to his brother's tolerant face and smiled, several other instances of being in this exact position flashing through his mind. "I love you, Bubby," he muttered, reverting back to the childish name he'd used when he couldn't pronounce brother. Suddenly overwhelmed by emotions, Donny felt tears welling up in his eyes, and his stomach clenched simultaneously. Eddie stepped back, and Donny dry-heaved over the bucket. There wasn't much left in his stomach at this point. The officer climbed in behind the wheel, turned to eye him over his shoulder, then waved at Doc and Eddie. They drove off, no flashing lights, no sirens, just the darkness swallowing up the coach house trailer park behind them. Donny pressed his cheek to the cool glass of his window and knew nothing more. A few days later, Edith sat across the table from Eddie, the growing pile of tissues in her lap a testament to how painful this whole situation was for her. She knew it was the right thing to do. She knew she couldn't allow him back the way things were. She knew she had to stay firm. But Donny was her baby, and this whole terrible development was breaking her heart. "Mom, he's not a little boy anymore, but you treat him as though he still is." Eddie's voice was quiet, kind, and Edith nodded. She was glad he'd been there to handle everything for her. "I know. I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing. This isn't your fault, him being in trouble like this." Eddie reached across the table and patted her hand, awkward with his affection. "Willow isn't pressing charges, and you aren't involved either. As the park manager, it all falls on my shoulders, and Doc was a witness to it." "I'm so glad you made that last walk around the park, Eddie. I can't imagine what might have happened if no one had stopped him." She gulped back a sob. "I didn't know he'd gotten so bad. No wonder Sheena kicked him out. No wonder." She shook her head at her own blindness. "But, oh, Eddie, I hope they treat him well. I've heard such terrible things about those places." "It's fine, Mom. This is the best thing for him. Besides, he could probably use a little rough handling anyway." "No!" Edith gasped, but Eddie laughed. "You watch too much television, Mom. They're not going to hurt him or rough him up or do anything else besides clean him up and give him the opportunity to make some different decisions." Eddie stood and returned his Flying J cap to his head, curling the bill absent-mindedly, a habit he'd had since he was a little boy. "When he comes out of this, he'll either thank us or go back to the way he was, but he won't be able to blame it on anyone but himself." "Well, I'm praying for him every waking moment." Edith blew her nose and took a deep breath. Then she smiled softly and looked up at Eddie. "You've turned into such a fine young man, and I think a certain fine young woman is noticing." "Mom, Willow's—" "I wasn't talking about Willow Goodhope," she interrupted, "although she's a fine young woman, too." "Oh." This time Eddie's face lit up like a beacon, and Edith laughed out loud at his uncharacteristic embarrassment. Maybe there was hope for this little family of hers after all. Just maybe. We hope you have enjoyed this production of July Madness, Part 7, Elderberry Croft, Seasons of the Heart. Copyright 2014 by Becky Dowdy. Production copyright 2022 by Becky Dowdy. This is a Brave Hearts Press audio production. Thank you for listening.